Everyone, welcome back. It's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we'll be drawing out a polar bear. As always, I'm using a Wacom Intuos Pro tablet, and I'm drawing straight into Photoshop. So, let's get arting. Okay, so we're going to do the polar bear that we've already sketched out here. I'm going to change my color to white, start a new layer by hitting button over here, and then taking my hard round brush tool, which is set to a size of 15, and make the individual strokes. So I'm going to start up by the nose, right? And so, you do one line, and one in between. And so we build it up. Now, to keep the lines going straight and orderly, up the middle, I'll go kind of straight up, but I'll aim the rest of these lines for the corner of the eye here. And that helps avoid line conflict so that on top, right, the lines will swerve up and over the eye, and underneath they'll swerve under the eye. So that's a good point to aim for, and then twisting the lines for everything else. And be careful by the eyes. The eyes are something, that everyone notices, so it's just a matter of building all of that up. So same thing on this side, right? So we bring that over and aim for the corner of the eye, so that then above that line we're swerving our brush strokes up and over, and then below that line we're swerving them underneath, and then aiming the rest of those lines to go underneath as well, right? And then off the nose, have the lines come straight off as you work your way kind of around, because there'll be a gap where the nose is, where the cheeks are pushing a bit forward, so you don't need to angle these, except maybe in the crease where they're going to be a little bit aimed at each other because of the dip in the mouth here. Otherwise, that's straight off and just building it up the same way. Polar bears, there is some black by their mouths right here and on their nose. I'm not really doing that. I will on the nose. There isn't a lot of black elsewhere, so it'll make it nice and easy. It's just sort of one solid color here. And then up, up in here, I do curve those lines so that they angle down as you come. And then, these lines would just sort of angle in the right directions, right? We've already established where they're going because of how we've already drawn out up to the eyes. So the middle will just come all the way straight up, right to the top, and then the others are going to angle off on either side respectively. So nice and easy. Same is true with the chin, right? I'm going to bring one set of lines straight down, and then another I'm going to start angling off to the side. Right, so nice and easy there, and then we have the rest of the mouth or the rest of the cheeks running into it there. Same thing over here, right? Angling that off, but the middle comes straight down. That helps avoid line conflicts, which is why I do it. Okay, so I'm going to finish filling in the rest of his face with these lines, and I will be right back. Alright, so here is the polar bear. So we're going to have the light source coming from above and to the right. As always, that means above and in front of, not behind or next to. That would change how the lighting would be. And I always choose a light source that I think is going to highlight my subject in the best possible way. So I'm going to start a new layer. And anywhere where, I'm adding the highlight, I'm going to be putting full pin pressure, right? You have that nice thick pin pressure. But we're going to have plenty of shadowing as well, and that's going to be sort of very light pin pressure. Right over here we're going to have some light pin pressure You can see the difference is significant. So, you know, you're going to have certainly some shadowing all the way on this back side. Now, you know, all edges are in shadow, even the side of the light source. It just won't be in as much shadow as the side away from the light source. Being a predator, though, their faces are a little bit more forward facing as opposed to, you know, like deer and donkeys where their heads are, you know, the whole side would be in shadow. It's not the same for a predator or any animal whose eyes are forward facing. So the same is true for a bear. Certainly you'll have that dip, but so on the side light source, it's not a deep shadow. It doesn't have to be anything big. Just enough, you know, to indicate that it's rounded. It's how we indicate that it's rounded. Because as it rounds away from us, it's rounding away from the light source, and thus it is in shadow. If the light source was to the side, directly to the side, then it would be in highlight instead. Or behind it. The face would be in shadow and the edges would be in highlight because it'd be catching the light from behind. But, you know, again, that's why I don't do that. It's a little weirder to put your subject in shadow, and so I'm less likely to do that. You can. I mean, it's just something to consider. The chin, I usually do fully in shadow, but there will be some highlights on it. So while I'm shadowing, I'm just going to go ahead and shadow the chin. Not only am I backing off my pin pressure, but I'm putting in less strokes. So that's another thing is the more lines I add, the brighter it'll get as well. So being careful not to add too many lines while I'm doing this. Otherwise, I'll accidentally create a highlight. There will be some shadowing on his cheek over here, but some of this will be in highlight. Like the chin, I'm going to do the whole thing in shadow. It's just going to be easier. Right, so just that backed off pin pressure. There'll be shadowing underneath on this side as well. And anywhere before it connects back into the face, in theory, there's a gap, right? So that would be just a little bit of shadow. There'll be shadow on the head because it's rounding away from the light source. It gets deeper as it comes to that side. As we go around, right? So we have this little bit, and then it'll slowly connect in. We have the top of the head, all of this, so you have very minimal shadowing up in here, just like you do on the side of the light source because it's on that side, right? So minimal shadowing as we bring it over. And then the forehead tends to have the least amount of shadows when you have a light source above, because it's kind of like if you have a ball, right? If you, because that's really what our faces are, right? Especially him, he's very circular, but if you just took the top part, that's just a ball. And on animals, on most animals, there's not a lot in the way on the forehead. So there's not, you know, you don't have the nose peeking out and other things, so you would, it would be catching more of that highlight. But on that backside, certainly would be going into shadow, and you have a dip in the eye happening. That would be casting that shadow from there and giving yourself a nice big runway. It helps to add in the highlights because as you're building the highlights up, it can be easier to do when you have a little bit more room to play with, which is why I'll overshadow. It's easier to add highlight than to take highlight away with this style. Sorry, I'm still congested. It's that COVID from a few weeks ago. It's not so bad. The congestion isn't nearly as bad as it was with, you know, like a cold or something, but other symptoms were much worse. Hasn't quite shaken all of it though. Right, so we have here, and then shadowing the rest of this, even though some of this is going to be in highlight. It's just easier. The nose itself isn't big enough to block the highlight that would happen on the mouth here. And I'm probably also going to go ahead and put shadow on the eyelids, just for ease. Right, so the eyelids, being careful around the eye. Again, that's something we look at, so same over here, being careful around the eye. So that's what we have so far. And then rest of this is going to be full pin pressure, right? Building that out, following the lines we've already done. And the reason I'm leaving my sketch layer on is because of how I've sketched it around the eyes. I'm going to need to be careful. I think I could take it off once I get the eyes set, because everything else is pretty much set up. So I'm going to do the rest of this in highlight, and I will be right back. All right, still adding some shadowing, but for the most part it's filled in. So I'm going to add the highlighting on this side, much like we did on this side, and we can temper out where that cutoff is. And then on the chin, right, so that's just adding more lines, not more pin pressure, right? And you can see how fast just adding a ton of quick lines builds up that color. But this wouldn't be, the nose wouldn't be doing enough to block this out, so you would still have a decent amount of highlight over here, but it would still be rounding off on the other side. So even though there's a decent amount of highlight here, it would still be tempering off. And then after we brighten this up, and I'm leaving the middle a little dark because polar bears tend to have a little bit of darkness there, I'm going to come over here and temper this, right, to match it to what I did on the other side and where that cuts, which is down here, right? So this all needs to blend like it's one and not a separate line. And then I'm going to temper out how dark that transition is. I'm just going to do that by adding a few light, not a whole lot of pin pressure, but a few light lines. And that'll make that not as deep of a transition. Still needs to be there, but it doesn't have to be as deep. Brighten up this just a little bit. Right, face a little flatter because it's a predator. Still has dips, but it's also why there's more highlight on his face under the eye than what I'll usually do. Even though it's on the opposite side of the light source, it's still a predator with a flat enough face. There would be still some amount of light coming in over here. So to indicate that, it's just a matter of adding in more lines, right? Okay, he's looking kind of cute. He could pass as a polar bear. When I was first doing it, I was like, I don't know, he kind of looks like a chipmunk or something. A white chipmunk. I'm just fixing a few spots that look a little too dark, right? Like this style, you can easily do that. Of course, after we do this, we still have to do the ears. Okay. So, give me just a second. We'll move on to the chin. Just trying to make sure everything kind of matches. Okay, so the chin, same thing, kind of here in the middle. I'm going to add a burst of white. In the middle, I mean I'm giving a gap underneath and a gap under the chin itself. So there needs to be a shadow above and below, so I'm just adding more lines. And that would carry across the middle and onto the other direction, but it would start tapering out. Easy to control with making light lines like this. Still want to make sure one side is more distinct. All right, there we go. Now, before we transition to the ears, I'm just going to fill in the eyebrows a little bit better. You know, you do want to be careful around the eyes, but the did I say eyebrows? The eyelids, I might have, I don't know. The eyelids need a little bit of highlighting on them as well. But first I just need to get them in, right? So a little bit of highlighting and then a little bit of highlighting. Just trying to make sure the eyes are also straight. So that's kind of in the middle because you want a clear delineation on eyelids where they're going into a recess. So there's a little bit of shadowing there. And then likewise underneath, you know, you'd have a little bit of shadowing as it rounds down and under the eye. And then I'm just, there's a weird spot here. I'm just trying to fix these edges. Again, eyes are something we pay attention to, so we'll notice if something is wrong. So getting it right's important. Yeah, okay. Now for the ears, you have, you know, we're going to have this part, which is kind of the outer edge of the ear. I kind of have the ear turned a bit. All right, so I'm going to do all of this in shadow. So this is the outer edge, and then we're going to have an intersection of the ear. That's what all of this is. But first I'm going to get these two done, and then we'll add a little bit of highlighting to them, and then we'll get the middle part, because it'll be a different way that we're highlighting that, since it's that middle part's kind of, you know, it's going into the ear, so it's a little different than this outer edge, which is distinctly an outer edge. Now the ears are tucked back a little bit based on the light source above and to the right. You're going to have some highlighting kind of here in the middle, right weighted, so not against this back side, but again I'm just adding more lines because I've already put lines in. It's going to be easier to add shadow by adding more lines than it is doing that the opposite way. And then over here it's going to be more weighted on this side instead of the inside side, but I'm also going to leave a little gap for the head and the back side of the ear, right? So this up here shadow, this down here shadow, highlight more on that side, right? And we have a little bit of that. And then I'm going to fill the rest of this in better than what I just did. Oopsies. Okay. Right. So this ear, we want a nice strong edge, but it's going into a recess. So as I bring this down, not only am I using less pin pressure, right, I'm backing off my pin pressure, I'm using less lines, and that'll make it look like it's going into the dark. And we can pull some of these lines down here when you consider, just think about where the inside of the ear is going, right, and that's where you would drag the lines down to. Same thing on this side, right, very light lines connecting the outer edge So just that very light, connecting that outer edge, and then pulling it down, but being mindful of how many strokes. And because this is on the shadowed side, it needs to be more in shadow than the highlighted side, right? So even less strokes as we bring it down. Now I can add, if I wanted to, like maybe just a little bit through here where maybe light would be catching. Same thing on this side, which kind of is already there, but assuming some light's catching on the inside of the ear where the way the angle's coming in, and then fading that off just very quickly. Right. There we go. And then we have the nose, which I'm going to choose a gray. I always do a midpoint gray when I'm doing this because I'm designing in black. So after this, we'll do the eyes. Right, so again, their noses are kind of like dog noses, so you know you're going to have kind of this loop that happens. And the way I drew it isn't exactly right, but that's all right. That loop comes back up and out to some of that. There's a dip in the middle, which we won't get when we're doing this initial sketch. And you kind of do the same thing on this side, right? This is looping out. This would loop down. There'd be a little bit of a gap here, and then it would loop out to fill that in. So when we remove it, we have that kind of distinctive dog nose effect, right? It was sketched very poorly, but they loop, they do kind of a curly T that goes down into a curly bottom of the T. Almost looks like a tree if you really want to think about it that way. Right, so when you're doing that with black, you want to kind of match both sides, right? So I'm going to pull this in just a little bit on this side. Give that the same kind of treatment I did on the other. I'm never going to put full pin pressure for black, but there are some sections that are going to have some highlight, and that's down through here. Going to have some highlight, so that's just more pin strokes, not pin pressure. Whew. You would have some highlight coming across right about here. There's a dip in the nose, right? So you'd have some highlight picking up on the other side of the dip. And then of course on the top, because it's not up here, it's just once you get below. As you move across, you would start transitioning into shadow as well, and then underneath, right? This is also shadow. Still going to fill it in, but it is shadow. Just that bit. And then of course under the nostril would be shadow. So as we're bringing this over, less and less strokes. So I'm actually mindful of what I'm doing. Still enough to give it a little bit of a highlight, not enough to overwhelm it. Same thing over here, underneath, definitely shadow, but some highlight up above. So that's more strokes. It's okay if your strokes aren't even. You can see mine never are. And we can fix the white around the nose as needed. Right, so we can brighten this up just a little bit. It's kind of in the middle-ish. And then down here, on this side, maybe a little over here, but not much. Maybe a little pushing over here. Delicate balance when you're using gray for black. And then as needed, we can fill in a little bit more of this to temper out how that's looking. Okay. I think I liked it without it. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to the white. And I'm going to push in the edges all the way up to the edge of the nose. On both sides. Right. So now we have the eyes. I didn't sketch them out this time. That's fine, I can use the white to do that. Right, so if we're looking at the iris, have something that looks kind of like that. Same thing, very close to the edge. Yeah, and then we'll fill this in with the white. It's just light pin pressure. It's the whites of the eyes. Wouldn't do this, except we're doing right a little bit more of a cartoon style. So in that case, I will do it. I'll add just a little bit, but not much of a highlight here. Same thing on this side. Add just a little bit, but not much of a highlight here. That fades. Okay. And then we have the iris, which will be brown. Usually I select my colors beforehand, but I did not. I'm not really sure why I didn't this time, but I didn't. So here we are. It's probably a good brown. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw out the pupil, right? So you want it to look at you, which usually means you need it looking a little bit more cross-eyed than you think you need it looking, right? So you want it a little bit more on that inside line on both sides, so it has that kind of look to it. And then you're going to fill in the whole thing with brown. Again, this is just light pin pressure. Following the edge that we did for the pupil, right? I'm just fanning out from there. So I'm doing a circle all the way around. So I'm going to do that with both eyes, and I'll be right back. Now, before we finish, I'm going to come up here with the elliptical marquee tool. I'm going to create an oval. Come in here and erase, and then select inverse. Go back to the hard round brush and fill in the edges against the pupil, and I can do this in a different direction. It makes it almost like a crosshatch. Just want to make sure that the edges of the pupil are nice and clean, much like I said before, right, with around the edge of the eyes, we notice with the pupils as well. Right, so I'm going to select inverse it again, reselect the elliptical marquee tool, and go back because that doesn't look good. Do a better job than I just did a second ago. Oh, did I not do that right? Let's try that again. Select inverse, reselect the elliptical marquee tool, and drag it over. That looks better. Do the same thing here. Select inverse, reselect the brush, and once again fill in the edges around the eye, changing direction if you need to, which I'd recommend, especially with this style. And in the end, we won't really notice. And crosshatch, like I said, crosshatches are perfectly fine drawing technique, so it creates kind of that crosshatch look. Okay, so yeah, that's close enough to be workable. So now we're going on to highlights. We're going to start with a line on the opposite side of the light source against the pupil. That's why I was a little bit more willing to be a little harsher there, but be a little bit better than what I just did there. So you're going to do that on both sides. A line right against the pupil. Because it's like if you have a coffee cup, right? The side away from the light source is going to catch the highlight as it's coming back out, and the side towards is going to go into shadow. So this will be shadow on the inside side, and it'll be highlight on that outside. And then it'll be highlight right over here. Pushing up. So now the shadow that's cast is cast by the eyelid. I'm going to push this down and under. Right? Push it down and under. And once we get to the edge, we'll want to taper this out. So once again, that light pin pressure, because it'll be even against the white, we have a dark ring around our irises, so that'll be dark there, and allowing that to fade down. And then once we get to this side, fading out the bright line we put, but also fading it out over here, right? This is lighter pin pressure, but it's going to be brighter than what's going above. So even though this is in shadow, what's up here is in bigger shadow. So as we do this, we'll need to make sure that this side ends up brighter than the top. So that can be a bit tricky, especially because it's not a direction my muscles are strong in. So my strokes tend to be a little wobblier when I go up. But luckily, eyes have a whole lot going on. A lot of muscles inside of them. So it's okay if your eyes are not nice even strokes. All right. So now that we've done that, it's time to make it look prettier than what we have now. Right? So we have the basic idea. Now we're going to taper this off as we bring it up, right? Fade it out. So that's just pushing it up, but lowering my pin pressure to allow me to blend it. Same thing as I bring it on that inside, right? Blending that nice and up and around. Really giving this a nice burst down here, fading it out on the edge. And then giving it that same treatment on this side where I'm doing that light pin pressure, but I'm adding more lines than what I did up top, which will fill it in a lot more, but not overdoing it to the point where it's brighter than what's underneath and to the right side, right? And I can brighten up as I add more lines. I brighten that up. So that's one side. Take a quick look back. That's what we have so far. And we'll do the same thing on this side, right? So we have that harsher light fading out by the edge, especially because we're on the shadowed side. Fading out here, harsh light underneath, all the way under, connecting that in, fading it out on the edge, fading it as we come to this back side, but allowing that strong burst of light to fade out too. So filling this in, and then the top, and then sort of refining it. So we get all of the basics in. Top has to be what dictates the brightness of everything, but you want both eyes to kind of match, and if they don't, you want the side on the opposite side of the light source to be darker. But to, somewhat match as much as possible. Easier said than done sometimes, especially if it's a little harder on the angle that you're drawing. Right, so now we fade it in. It's that light pin pressure to allow it to fade, blend nicely, without doing a really harsh one right by the edge. Blends it nicely. Can push in some of that harsher pin pressure in the middle to really brighten it. And doing the same over here where we're blending this in and blending it all the way up. Well, not all the way up. As high as the shadow is going to go, right? So you're following the line of the eyelid. That's what's casting the shadow. And also considering that the eyes are like a circle in our head. So you're doing that and following the circle of the eyes. It's a combination of both. And then just like on the other side, we'll brighten this up a bit. So that's where we end up. And then we're going to do the light flare, which we're going to take the white. Okay, fine. We're going to take the elliptical Maki tool. We're going to create like a little oval and or circle. Push it, make sure it's in to the pupil. And then we're going to fill it with the foreground color, which I've already changed to that off-white I like to use. Drag it over and do the same thing on the other side. Right, and there we go. There is a polar bear. Alright, so that's how you draw a polar bear. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.